Yo, what's going on everybody, Swagkage here, and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about how Hidan became immortal and how his immortality works. Now, I am making this video due to an overwhelming amount of popular demand, but there isn't a whole lot to discuss here because there aren't very many sources that heavily elaborate on either of the things I just mentioned. But with that said, I will do my best to provide you with all of the information that is present about this technique, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, I'm sure many of you have guessed this already, but Hidan's immortality is linked to the religion of Jashin. Since he was such a devout follower of the Jashin doctrine, he was allowed to take part in a ritual performed by other followers of the religion that allowed him to become immortal. Now, this wasn't something that very many people had the luxury of. It's never stated how many people became immortal through this ritual, but it is stated that Hidan is the first person to successfully receive the ritual's blessing. I imagine that there are probably a lot of cases of other people who took part in this ritual suffering very serious negative side effects, because while the nature of this ritual is never specified, it is stated to be some sort of subclass of forbidden jutsu in the third data book. And since there's nothing inherently wrong with just making somebody immortal, I mean, let's just say the ritual probably entails some pretty wacky stuff. Anyway, as for the immortality itself, it works pretty much as you would expect it to. Hidan cannot be killed by any basic physical injuries, though something as extreme as his body being vaporized may be an exception to this. The only known way that Hidan can die is through malnutrition or starvation, according to the second fan book anyway, meaning that it is technically possible to kill him directly by decapitating him and keeping his head and body apart for long enough that he starves to death. This inability to die from external injuries also seems to extend to a broad overall resistance to blunt force, though he is still susceptible to dismemberment and receiving cuts from sharp objects, like Luffy from One Piece. I say this because Hidan has tanked pretty much every attempt to damage him through sheer force alone, with the best example being when he showed little to no signs of damage, aside from decapitation of course, after standing directly in the center of the collective explosion of dozens of paper bombs at once. Any injuries that he does sustain seem to have no effect on his body anyway. Even when decapitated, Hidan can still smell, speak, and hear things just fine, and the only thing he really loses is control over the rest of his body. Furthermore, his head can simply be stitched back on. Kakazu has done this multiple times, and it'll be as if he never had his head cut off in the first place. Also, impaling himself through the heart doesn't seem to slow his body down or impede its production of blood. And I mean, he fought with a tailed beast, Maratabi, and came out of the battle looking pretty much unharmed. So I guess, yeah, you probably get the point. Now, despite his resistance to the effects of his own injuries, Hidan still feels pain from them, and at least in his case, this is probably one of the best and most beneficial aspects of his immortality. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Hidan is capable of performing a ritual that allows him to create a circle on the ground that he can stand in to cause any injuries that are inflicted on his body to also be inflicted onto his opponent's body. The fact that he still feels the effects of the damage he sustains without actually having his body hindered makes this ritual incredibly effective since, well, I mean, I doubt I need to explain it to you. The fact that Hidan doesn't suffer any of the consequences of his own injuries, aside from the pain which he feels pleasure from anyway, means that this ritual of his practically has no cost of its own. I don't know how heavily the curse technique of his is tied to his immortality, if it's even connected at all, but I doubt anybody needs me to explain it for them anyway. The mechanics are explained well enough in the manga. Hidan just has to draw his opponent's blood, ingest the blood himself, and then he can perform the ritual, and it works just like I've described. Any damage that Hidan takes is reflected on his enemy's body, though I don't know if the reverse is true as well. Anyway, that's about all there is to say about Hidan's immortality. Sorry about the shorter video, but a whole bunch of people wanted me to explain this, and like I said, there isn't a whole lot to talk about on this subject. Hopefully you guys forgive me. Try not to worry too much. I promise I'll put out a longer video next week, but until then, I'll talk to you later. Swagkage out. Bye.